every one of us in this room, we've got dreams, things with all our heart we'd really like to do. But I promise you, the only way to get there is to make today count. Start and be faithful in the small things.
Welcome back to There Is Always a Way. There's always a way to do the right thing with Dr. Jay Strack. And I am Malachi O'Brien, excited to host this conversation with Dr. Jay. Dr. Jay is no stranger to many of you, founder of Student Leadership University that's trained, I think, 1 trillion students. He's written like 30
every
books.
Every month.
Yeah, every month. It's just, it's huge. No, seriously, Dr. Jay is a friend to so many. It's just amazing how God's used Dr. J, and he's no stranger to the topic that we're going through on leadership and the series we're doing on Aim High. And so again, I'm just thrilled to jump back in for our next episode and the episodes to follow. Please, if you haven't seen the beginning episodes, go back and watch them or listen to them, and be sure to stay tuned for what's ahead. These are short conversations, about 15 minutes every day, to help you in this moment to grow as a leader. Now, Dr. J, I want to ask you this question before we dive into today's topic, which I'm excited about. You referenced it in the last conversation, the spirit of nevertheless, that we're going to get into. I'm kind of curious to hear what that is, but before we do, you've mentioned some pretty famous names, so to speak, depending on who you are. You mentioned Zig Ziglar, and you mentioned Dr. John Maxwell. Now, Dr. John Maxwell, I think you can't go anywhere and not see a book by Dr. John Maxwell. I think he writes a book a week on the topic of leadership.
He took the Book of the Month Club and turned it into 21 days in a row, release a book. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It's incredible. But how do you know Dr. John, and how did that friendship emerge? And then tell us something about Dr. John Maxwell that maybe very few would know, but would be very insightful.
I think there's a couple things about Dr. John. First of all, I've been privileged to know him maybe 30 years now, and no one has been more of a supporter and helped us launch and really put Student Leadership University on the map. So he is not only someone who writes a lot of great content, has great conferences, and, attracts a lot of people, the law of attraction, but he's also an enabler, a equipper, an encourager. If you've got John Maxwell as a friend, you got a great friend. So he's the real deal. And sometimes you see these guys and they're dressed, well, and they got a little panache about them, and a little gravitas about them. And John is a sharp guy. But the thing about him is he's everything in private that he is in public. He is the real deal. So I've seen him in every time of day, circumstance, difficulty, discouragement, disappointment, but also great moments of joy and ecstasy. And he's the real deal. So I read everything. I have probably, arguably, every John Maxwell book. So I met John years ago. I was a preacher and had spoken at Liberty University. Was privileged to do their first week of spiritual emphasis every year, and they would do it early in the school year, not late in the school year, to kind of set the tone. And I was privileged for some 14, 15 years in a row to do that at Liberty. So while up there at Liberty speaking, a good friend of mine, a guy that's the founder of World Help, which is a phenomenal global missions organization with resources and food and training. I mean, it's just an amazing World Help Ministries. But he gave me a pink tape, a tape with a pink label on it. Look, I said, this looks like a Pepto-Bismol deal. And it was by a guy named John Maxwell. He said, just listen to these 2 tapes. Tell me what you think. Well, man, I listened to those 2 cassette tapes, and I'm dating myself and John with this, but because I listened to those 2 tapes about 10 times. And it was on attitude, and it was on basic leadership, put your underwear on first kind of stuff. I mean, basics, put your socks on before your shoes, but basic, but yet profound. And he did it as a minister. And I don't know if you remember, but during one of our times, I talked about, I had a doctorate degree but I never knew about time management. I had a doctor's degree, didn't know about, I knew about goal setting because I'd met Zig early on, but the value of written goals. But other than that, and I didn't know about leadership. I didn't know about time management. I didn't know about vision. And all of a sudden, I heard these tapes, and that he put out one a month. And then I was privileged to go preach for John when he was pastoring in San Diego. And I spoke in almost all the area high schools. And it was unbelievable what all happened. But I got to spend this week with John. So that was almost 30 years ago. And he is, like I said, no one did more to help me launch and put Student Leadership University, what we were trying to do for students. And instead of John going, well, in fact, he'd already put a couple things in place to have a teenage training program, and he saw what we were doing and met a lot of our young people that had been through the program, were now interns. He said, Jay, I'm going to just focus everyone to go to your program. We don't both need to be doing a program. And that taught me a lot too, because there's been several times I've been tempted to say, well, I'm going to do this. But then I saw somebody that was doing it and doing it well. And I said, well, maybe I ought to just help them do what God's called them, So it's that multiplication law. So John taught me that. So I've known him personally, known his family, and benefited from John Maxwell and what he does with Equip all over the world. So he's a phenomenal guy. And I want to say this in all humility. I'm a much better leader than John. I met John Maxwell before he was anything, okay? He met me, look what's happened. I met him, I'm still trying to get noticed. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's because I'm a better, I don't know, just a thought.
Yes.
Anyway,
I hope Dr. John, I hope Dr. John gets a chance to listen to this episode for sure. We'll find a way to make that happen. So, because there's always a way, Dr. J.
Always a way.
There's always a way. But no, that's insightful. I would love to maybe do a future conversation just on some people that because I think we need to connect generations to different voices, and there's something about just hearing from. So I would love another day, another time for us to go deeper with Zig Ziglar, Dr. John, and others. But today's conversation, we're in a series on Aim High. We're in this COVID-19 moment where people are in isolation. It looks like for another, depending on when you're listening or watching this, for 30 more days. So these are some daily videos and some conversations we're having to encourage students, middle school, high school, college students, and leaders in general. And so we're in this series on Aim High. So today we're talking about the spirit of nevertheless. I'm going to kick this back over to you, and I want you just to take it away. What do you mean in today's conversation, the spirit of nevertheless?
Well, early on, we started talking about the 5 smooth stones of David, right? And talking about, there was something about this young man, and I say the little boy has to sit down, the little girl has to sit down, the man, the woman stand. But David was that young guy, so he models for us so many of these principles. So I learned what I know about the spirit of nevertheless from the life of David. And so the scripture gives us some amazing insights into him. Now, first of all, everybody needs to remember, especially with this plague that we're going through right now, and I think you could use the term plague, this virus that is no respecter of persons and is playing for keeps, by the way. So one of the things I would remind everybody on is we need the spirit of nevertheless. David, time after time after time, had challenges, but nevertheless, he went on. And I spoke on this subject one time during a crusade and got to meet a guy named Gary Carter, the kid, Hall of Fame catcher for the world champion New York Mets. I mean, just this remarkable enthusiast. He's called the kid, even though he was playing late into, for a lot of years, still was catching and playing. But because he still had the enthusiasm of a rookie, they called him the kid. And so this guy, Mr. Enthusiasm, Gary Carter, when he heard about the concept of the spirit of nevertheless, I got him a T-shirt because we made those shirts available for a while, on the merch table back in the day, on the spirit of nevertheless. So he wore one to spring training, and some of the other players, I was told, and got to travel with the team a couple times and do chapel a couple times, but they began to wear those shirts, the spirit of nevertheless. So it's pretty cool seeing a professional team, professional athletes responding. How do you meet the long grind of a season? Spirit of nevertheless. How do you go through when you're on the bench because of an injury? We all feel like we've kind of been put on the bench right now, while we're in this quarantine or furlough or whatever the term is, right? So simply put, the spirit of nevertheless is something I learned from the life of David, and it catapulted him from being a lad to a leader, from being a shepherd to a sovereign, took him from the palace to the pasture. And I sound like Dr. King there for a moment. Sorry. But anyway, I'll try to sound like Dr. King more often, because what a great orator and a great, great man of God. But I want to remind everybody, before we kind of talk about the spirit of nevertheless, there's 4 basic types of people that you're going to have around you. 4 basic types. Number 1, you got the failures. We always are going to have folks around us that, bless their heart, just have one setback after another setback after another setback. Now, this isn't a put down, because that was me. I be that person, right? As we used to say. I was a failure. I never finished anything I started. And by the way, if you're taking notes, you're going to record some thoughts and some principles. If you want to be known for something, here's something great. Be known as somebody that finishes what you start. Finish that book. One book, just finish it. Okay. Now make it a short one. Don't go after War and Peace to get started, right? You want some bite-sized victories if you can. But finish that book. Finish that project. Keep your promise. Finish strong. I mean, there's just something about and I was a person who never finished anything. I was quick to volunteer, quick to want to do the right thing, but it just faded. I was a failure, in the sense I failed at one thing after another. And pretty soon it becomes addictive. And pretty soon you're writing your own narrative. People view you that way, and then they hear you complaining about it and talking about it. So you've got the failures, all right? And, that loser's limp we talked about. You're competing, but yet, all of us, I pulled a muscle, when in reality, you just got beat, right? So number 1, then you got the figures. Those that figure everything out. And we have a lot of people doing that, and we need the scientists doing that. We don't need all the commentators doing it, where they're trying to figure out where this virus is going to go, where this pandemic is going to go. And some of the figures that they come up with, makes you want to get in bed and pull the curtains over you, and pull the sheets up over your head and close the curtains, right? And triple lock the door and put the alarm on, because we can get scared to death. So you've got those that are the failures. They just fail, and usually because they don't put much into it. Then you got the figures. Well, according to the numbers, according to the figures, the odds are great. I mean, do you know the odds that, after going through 6 different juvenile detention centers, the odds that I was going to be incarcerated and be a felon and be in a state prison or a federal prison? I mean, that was my pattern. That was where I was headed. And there were folks that already had that figured. He won't live to be 18. And I lost some friends along the way, because of alcohol, because of drugs, because of suicide, because of car wrecks, alcohol-related accidents, drug-related accidents. So I know it's like to stand over the grave of a friend and swear I'll never do drugs again and go right back to it. So you got the figures. I mean, and by the way, that's how it was for David. Obviously, here's Goliath, 9 foot tall, right? And David was average height. He was probably, maybe 5'9", 5'10". So how do you get by being a 5'10" guy in a 9 foot world? Well, so the figures were against him. And so you got the figures, and then you have what we call the feelers. Well, I just don't feel like that. I don't feel good. I don't feel like I want to do that. And we go by our feelings. And I promise you, I've got some days I don't feel like doing anything. If I let that be the lid on my life, if I let that be the thermostat, Now, if I don't feel good, I got to ask myself, why? Did I get enough sleep? Am I taking my vitamins and supplements? Am I doing something that's counterproductive? Whatever. Do I have sleep apnea? I mean, you want to get to what causes not feeling well. But don't be a failure. Don't be just the figurer who talks yourself out of it's too hard. I'll never be able to read that many pages. I'll never be able to get that done. Well, if you divide it up into how many days you've got, and then you're going to have a few days where you may be sick, or there may be a ball game, or there may be a conflict. So but there's a way to eat it a bite at a time. The Hindu proverb, you can eat an elephant a bite at a time. And so that's a appealing thing. I guess it's near lunchtime, maybe in some places. But so you've got the figures. David not only had to figure how tall the giant was and how to kill that giant, but then, that later on he wanted the Jerusalem to be his capital, wanted it to take it from the Jebusites, the enemy of the Hebrews. And they're in Jerusalem, that's where Jerusalem comes, the Jebusites, right? And so he had to see how tall the walls were. You remember the great story of Joshua leading the children of Israel into the promised land. They saw the walled city of Jericho. There's no way. Remember the spies came back and said, there's giants in the land. There's no way. We're too little. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. So you got the figures, you got the feelers, man, I just don't feel like this is the right time. I heard it when I was a pastor. I've heard it as a leader. I've heard it in companies and corporations. I've heard it in the ministry. I've heard it in high school. And I'd have people always, their feelings. And I've gotten to the point where I don't let feelings be the lead dog. I never want emotion to be the lead dog in my life. I had a hair trigger temper. I had a poor self-image. And, so it was easy for me to just fall back into that. But that's what discipline and spiritual growth and letting the Lord really do some things in your life. So you got the failures, you got the figurers, you got the feelers, and then you got the faithers. There's just something about, if God be for me, who could be against me? And what David said, David had faith. He said, the battle belongs to the Lord. And he said, why are you letting him mock our God? Why are you letting him call out and all these filthy things and blaspheme our God? And everybody was like Ellie Mae, hiding behind, wanting to go to the cement pond back in the day. That's an old reference. Look that one up. But anyway, they're like Ellie Mae hiding behind the rocks, complaining. But David, when everybody else was afraid of their shadow, said, hey, in the name of the Lord, I go. So there's something about being a faither. You want to know what the spirit of nevertheless is? Malachi, it's real simple. A bear came up and tried to destroy and take the flocks. The shepherd, and he was a shepherd boy, the shepherd would lay inside the door. Remember when Jesus said, I'm the door, and that no one can come through you unless they get through me? That's what the shepherd does. He would find a place to bed the sheep, hopefully up against the side of a mountain or up against a cliff, or, but there would be one entrance, and that's where he would sleep. And he learned to do that as a boy. If anybody's going to get through to my family, they don't have to come through me. Anybody going to get these sheep, don't have to come through me. If a sheep is lost, he goes and finds it, right? All those characteristics he learned as a young guy. That's why it's so important as a young man, a young lady, even during this time of quarantine, do something. Help out. Do something, or maybe earn some money making phone calls, there's always a way to make this time count. David learned principles doing not a very glamorous job being the shepherd boy out there alone all the time. But what did he do when he had time on his hands? He practiced slingshot. He learned to play the harp. He spent a lot of time looking up at the skies and the stars and thinking about God. Why is he the great hymn writer? Why is he the one called a man after God's own heart? It all started as a young guy. That's why I love talking to students, no matter their age. But man, it's your time. You can be everything you've ever dreamed of, and then exceedingly abundantly. God's got a plan for your life. It'll blow your mind. And it'll blow everybody else's mind. There's an old saying, behind every successful man, right, is a successful woman, right? the good woman, the wife, the completer, your helpmate. So, but then somebody added to that, behind every successful man is not only a very successful, godly, gifted wife, but is a surprise mother-in-law. You know, I mean, there's always going to be folks that'll be surprised by what you do, but you start learning to do those things and picking up those characteristics, developing those muscles when you're young. So get some victories under your belt. The bear attacked. What did David do? He killed the bear and probably made a coat out of it. Anyway, all right. Second of all, there was a lion. And this is a far different than a bear. Far faster, far quicker. You can sneak up on you, whereas a bear, you kind of have a sense it's coming. But he killed the lion. Nevertheless, David killed the bear. Nevertheless, David killed the lion. And then it came time to fight the giant. Nevertheless, what did he do? I have a picture hanging on my wall that I'll show everybody during one of our sessions. It's olive wood, founded at Caesarea by the Sea in Israel 40 years ago. And I've never seen anything quite like it since. But it's got David holding up the head of Goliath, you know, and I could just hear him in Hebrew saying, "Your mama," you know what I mean? But so nevertheless, he killed the giant, he killed the bear, he killed the lion. And then the Jebusites started mocking him. They said, "David, what is it you want?" "I'm coming. I'm going to capture your city." They said, "We're going to bring the blind out to fight you. We're the fortress. We're this giant fortress. There's no way you and your little ragtag army. And we're going to bring the blind out." And then they said, "We're going to bring the cripple out. We're going to bring the lame out. Next thing you know, we're going to dig up dead people and fight." I mean, talk about a put down. They just dismissed him. But what does it say? Nevertheless, David captured Jerusalem. And to this day, Jerusalem is known as David's city, right? And so, simply put, there's something about the spirit of nevertheless. So I don't want to be a failure. I don't want to have that lid on me, and I don't want to have a bunch of people around me that are always failing, always complaining, always upset. Things are never right. I don't want to be a figurer where but the odds are against me. The odds have been against me my whole life. All right. And then I certainly don't want to be a feeler and I want to be a faither. So the spirit of nevertheless is what I'm praying every student. And, you know, we've got a lot of university students watching. I just got a magazine here from the school that took a chance on me, Charleston Southern University. And there's some great Christian distinctive universities out there. But it says here that my alma mater, by the way, no, but anyway, it says here that they broke the national record for a Samaritan's Purse and how many boxes they put together, 5,249, and they beat the time record and they set the number record. So that's a bunch of college students figuring out, hey man, yeah, I'm working on my degree, I've got a part-time job, I got a lot of pressure, but man, what about people around the world getting one of those Christmas boxes? And now we've heard again, Samaritan's Purse, what they're doing in New York, what they're doing in Italy. They're every time there's a storm, they're amazing places. So, but you know, when I look at Samaritan's Purse, I go, man, there is a faither. They're going to get the job done. They don't. The Ebola breakout. Oh my gosh, no, there's no way. Well, they found out a way, and they went and they ministered in Jesus' name. So we've got so many examples of heroes, heroines, and I'm anxious to hear from a lot of our students talking about what another student has done that's inspired them. That'd be a good session to have one time, you know?
Absolutely. Well, Dr. J, this has been amazing. And my hope is, and I know it's your prayer, it's our prayer, it's the prayer of Student Leadership University and the endeavor that every young person, middle school, high school, college age, would really take on that spirit of nevertheless. And that, because no doubt there's somebody who's watching or listening who's a David right now, who no one sees, no one notices, but inside of them is something, the spirit of the nevertheless is inside of them. And so I'm excited that we get to have these conversations in this moment, and everybody who's watching is benefiting from it. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, Dr. J. This has been There's Always a Way with Dr. J. Strack. And then you have to know there's always a way to do the right thing, even in the midst of this coronavirus moment. there's always a way. So thank you so much. Have a great day, and tune in our next conversation. Again, you're going to be encouraged, equipped, and empowered to be just the best leader you can be for the kingdom. Have a great day. God bless.